I saw a number of hands, and essentially the 30 by 30 campaign is to, it's a very ambitious campaign to conserve 30% of our Earth's land and water resources by 2030. And I'll get a little bit more into the details, but just to prime you, in our region, we're between 5 and 6% of our land permanently protected. So we're facing a big uphill battle if we think that we're going to actually contribute to this goal. So let me start. Anybody identify the image that I'm showing? No? This is a view of downtown Richmond from Tree Hill Farm, just out Route 5. This shows just exactly how close our farmlands have been to our core and what we have begun to see as the erosion. So a little introduction about the Capital Region Land Conservancy. We have been around since 2005. We were established as a local land trust to serve Richmond, Chesterfield, Henrico, Hanover, Charles City County, New Kent County, Goochland, Powhatan, and Hanover and Ashland. And our mission has always been to conserve and protect our natural and historic land and water resources for the benefit of current and future generations, recognizing that we are the stewards and that there are a lot of different elements that we need to preserve for our entire community to be complete. So what is this 30 by 30? Well, here's a quick GIF, however you say. These are various components that make up the 30 by 30 campaign strategy. Urban spaces are one of them. State parks, national parks. We have tribal lands. We have marine protected areas. We have farms, working lands, forest, wilderness areas. So there is a very diverse range of ways that we can go about meeting the 30 by 30 goal. I like to give credit, and maybe this is not fair, but there was a Swiss philanthropist who in 2018 basically came out and said he was going to pledge $1 billion over 10 years in order to accelerate this campaign for nature to reach the 30 by 30. His name is Hans-Gerd Wyss, and I will just simply say that they have done quite a lot where they are contributing hundreds of millions of dollars a year to do large landscape scale conservation. And I read last year that the Nature Conservancy, in partnership with this foundation, had protected a landmass that was the size of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut combined. So they are putting their dollars where they speak. At the same time, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity is the formal and legal organization that has brought together the nations to agree to their goals for biological diversity. And back in 2010, when they had their convention, they set a goal, and that goal was essentially to preserve 17% of our land and inland waters and 10% of our coastal and marine areas. Now, they had to postpone their meeting, the convention, and it'll be occurring later this year in October back in China. And they have already released their plan, which now calls for the 30 by 30 goal. So when you look for the past 10 years, 17%, 10%. Now we're going to 30 by 30. And you'll see a major jump in the water. And that's due to a lot of science about how we need to protect our water resources beyond what we think we've been doing with our land. So here's where the world is today. Currently, the goal has not been met. 15.6% of the world's surface lands and inland waters has been permanently protected, with 7.6% of our oceans protected. And you will see the lands in green and the waters in blue in this illustration. In the United States, we have fared slightly imbalanced, again, 13% of the land, which is less than the world, but we have done 19% of our ocean waters, which is much greater than the world. And a lot of that has to do with the reefs and the work that has been done up near Alaska and in Hawaii. But we still haven't met the goal. Now Richmond and our region, we're at 5.5% of our region, and that includes all the jurisdictions I named earlier, is being permanently protected. And of that land that is permanently protected, a third of it is state-owned and another third of it is privately owned. Now we'll see this with the private landowners a little bit later, but interesting that that large of a number has been participatory in conserving the land in our region. The remaining third is made up of federal government. It is made up of local government, parks, recreational facilities. It's also made up of authorities. Any authority that owns owns land is considered here. Now, you ask, how does it compare on a locality basis? And I'm sure that we have people from all over the region very interested, and I'm sorry if this is very small print for you. I tried to get all of the localities onto one chart, but in our region, Hanover County is the worst performer when it comes to percentage of land that has been permanently protected. 3.1% of all of Hanover County is permanently protected. That compares to Charles City County, which is one of the poorest counties that we have, where 8.5% of the land is protected. What's interesting, and I'm going to say this with a lot of sincerity with Charles City County, they have a lot of competing needs. And some people would say growth, the bringing in of new houses, is going to be a way to generate new revenue for the county. But there was a report that we participated in that did both an fiscal economic analysis and an economic impact analysis on land conservation in Charles City County. And essentially for every dollar, they generated a 20 cents surplus from lands that were conserved, lands that pay taxes still, private lands that pay taxes, but because they've been conserved, they can produce income, but they don't come with the burden of having to have schools, roads, fire departments, and all of the other infrastructure that comes with residents. This I'm happy to make available. I try to update this chart about once a year. For the city of Richmond, we're right in there at 4.9%. You'll see Henrico and Chesterfield. Both of them are leading the way when it comes to land conservation, and particularly in local government land. They have a lot of parklands in both of those counties, but they're also very large counties. So let's not give them all the benefit of the doubt, but I do want to call them out as being at the top of this list. Here's a map. This is a distribution of those conserved lands, and you will see that it is made up of the different type of ownership: federal lands, nonprofit lands, state lands, local lands, private conservation easements. And unfortunately, this is a little, to me, like a polka dot. It doesn't show any rhyme or reason. It doesn't show landscape orientation for strategic conservation, for wildlife habitat, or for any other strategy, even though we have local. Can you all see my cursor? Yes. So I do want to highlight an area out here. This is Malvern Hill. This is about 800 acres that Capital Region Land Conservancy purchased in 2018. And now we have about 8,000 acres of contiguous conserved lands in this area when you come across the river to Presque National Wildlife Refuge. This area down here is going to be Fort Lee. So again, federal lands, even though they are developed, are considered protected lands under the way that these are calculated. So, and of course, the red are private conservation easements. So why is it difficult to get to 30 by 30? Well, I love this quote from the Land Trust Alliance Vice President of Conservation Initiatives. 9 years. We have 9 years to conserve 440 million acres, and that's in the United States. That's a huge number, and it is a very big hill to climb. And not only is it going to be challenging just to do the work, but we are fighting conversion at such a rapid rate. Every 30 seconds, a football field worth of America's nature is being converted. How fast can we do this to conserve 440 million acres before they're developed? It's a huge threat, which makes the 30 by 30 campaign that much more difficult. Also, when we talk about land ownership, of all of the land in the United States, 60% of it is privately owned. So now we have to convince private landowners that permanently protecting their land is important and the right thing. And many of them might have their value, their assets, their cash tied up in the land. So why would they want to preserve it and therefore potentially lose value? And you can see here, only 3% of the protected lands in the entire country are from private lands. Now we have a different story in our region, as I shared with you. So we've done a great job of working and communicating this value with landowners. And I do credit it to the early work of the James River Park, putting it into an easement. I credit it to a lot of volunteers and others making this effort happen locally. And I also will credit it to a big effort on historic preservation, and I'll highlight that later on in the presentation. So as I mentioned, conversion is a huge threat, and we have seen our ecological cores diminished. We facilitated, you might remember, a green infrastructure plan that the Regional Planning District Commission produced. It's probably been 15 years now. And we looked at our ecological cores and said, these are the areas that are the best for conserving natural habitat, to conserve wildlife corridors, to conserve working farms, working forests. And what you will see as I progress the slides is from this image that was from 2000 to 2007 to 2013. Now I'm going to back up to do this a little bit faster so that you can see it. 2000, anything in orange, anything in yellow is good, strong ecological core. You see it just disappear. That's what we have seen in our region. Now, just last year, and anybody that participated in Capital Region Land Conservancy's conservation games for team fields would have heard a presentation on farms under threat, something that is a huge report. It's the first of its kind to really analyze how we have been losing farmland, the rate of conversion, the causes of the conversion, doing scoring on both the state policy level as well as the state funding level. So if you don't have good policy and if you don't offer good funding in your budget, you're going to see a very quick rate of conversion. Now, Virginia and our region haven't fared so well. Virginia, in fact, made it in the top 10 on the bad side of the equation, where we have seen conversion at a faster rate than most of the country. We got good points for good policy. We had mediocre points for our funding strategies. And frankly, the funding strategies that we get out of the General Assembly are for private land conservation. $75 million annually in the state budget goes to the Virginia Land Preservation Tax Credit to private landowners who put easements on their property, whereas they only have roughly 10, sometimes less, $10 million of grant money that they can put to buy easements from the state level. 75 million for the private sector, $10 million for the state sector. You can see where the efforts have gone. This illustration shows the conversion rate of farmland from 2001 to 2016. What you see in gray, they deem to have already been developed. What you see in red is where we have lost prime farmland. Not that it was just open space that we lost. These were prime soils that were converted. And you will see it all just continues to creep out as a ring around the center of the city. A lot of conversion up here in Mechanicsville, a lot of conversion down here in Chesterfield, a little bit coming out in Goochland. Again, I want to share with you how have our localities performed. Henrico County, in this essentially this 40-year period, saw a loss of nearly 67% of its farmland. Today, there are fewer than 100 farms in Henrico County, and the average farm size is less than 100 acres. And frankly, when I talked to someone in leadership at Henrico County and expressed my concern about our loss of our food chain and food supply, they said, why should they have to bear that? And I'm thinking, did you not learn anything from COVID when we couldn't get certain provisions? The supply chain broke down. Interestingly, oops, let me go back. Interestingly, on this chart, Powhatan was the second fastest conversion. And we're seeing a lot of conversion in Powhatan. And again, that's the localities trying to chase revenue. Again, Charles City, I said we've been seeing good progress in Charles City. They actually increased the number of acres in agricultural production in Charles City. Now, what are we left with? The Farms Under Threat report basically has a new data layer that says, here's where we are going to find our best soils today to continue agricultural production. And you will see a lot of it is down in the Varina area of Henrico to the east, a lot of it in eastern Hanover, kind of up along the Pamunkey, going into the North Anna. And then my image of Charles City got cut off, but you get a sense there. And then that western section of Hanover going into Rockville and Montpelier, and a little bit out here in the western Goochland area. That's where we're going to get our best farm soils. However, one of the models that we look at is what is the development vulnerability model. So yes, we know conversion is happening. Where is land conversion most likely to occur? This model used to be called Conserve Virginia Vision. It is still available through the Department of Conservation and Recreation's website called Virginia Natural Heritage Data Explorer, open and available to the public. And I will show you a number of maps that are from that data source. But you can see the threat of development is all around us. Red is essentially already developed. Yellow is really, really threatened. And we don't even have very much of that dark green. Well, where do we go? Interesting survey here. And this one, I will just share, it is representative of most surveys that the public has been asked the question, do you support protecting our land and water resources? Most people say yes. Do you support spending federal dollars, state dollars to protect our land and water resources? And again, most people will say yes. Well, now the question is, do you support the 30 by 30 campaign? That's a different question, because now it's saying, we know you support it, we know you're willing to spend money, but how fast are you willing to spend that money? And what I thought was perhaps a very strong example of the bipartisan nature of this is what you see. 76% of Republicans are saying yes to the 30 by 30, and 94% of the Democrats self-identified are saying yes to 30 by 30. Well, not everybody believes in 30 by 30. If you have read the report, the Global Deal for Nature, they're making an argument that it should be 50 by 50. And I think there are people that say, well, let's get to 30 by 30 because you don't get to 50 by 50 unless you cross 30 by 30 first. But there are people who are saying we need to get to 50 by 50, largely due to climate change, largely due to the accelerating temperatures of the earth, and what we are seeing in terms of the extinction of species that make up an ecosystem and the biodiversity that we know we need as one earth to operate. What I thought was interesting of this proposal for the 50 by 50 is you see the eastern shore of the United States, and they recognize because of our development that we simply will never get to 50 by 50, and that we should plan to get to at least 30 by 30, but there might have to be some leeway for how much over 30 we go. But our president just last week, May 6th, issued his new report, Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful. So this is a very timely presentation. I'm glad that we scheduled it so that I could kind of walk you through some of what President Biden has outlined. Now, it's not a complete document of how much money and where are these lands going to be, and it's strategically done that way. And I'll show you once we get to the principles. But you can see the president is challenging us to think about meeting this 30 by 30 goal. And certainly our organization, the Capital Region Land Conservancy, we have signed the formal pledge to do so. Whether we can meet that goal or not will be seen. But the purposes of this are to safeguard our drinking water, our clean air, our food supplies, the wildlife upon which we all depend, the need to fight climate change with natural solutions that our forests and agricultural lands and the ocean provide. And most importantly, I believe, the need to give every child in America the chance to experience the wonders of nature. And we know about the work of Richard Louv and the nature deficit disorders, and just the lack of connections that many of our youth have to the outdoors. So I thought that was a very important component. Now, in the document, there are several key principles. And the number one key principle is we must support the locally led conservation effort. This needs to be about us, our community, what's important to the Richmond region to conserve and preserve for our own identity and how we expend our own resources. So it is very much citizen driven on this level. There's also, number two, much more focus on equitable and inclusive visions. You know, every child must have that opportunity. And this is something that we know in Richmond. We have communities, about 25–30% of our population who cannot get to an outdoor very easily, outdoor open space. Third, we've got to honor the sovereignty of tribal nations and indigenous communities. These people were here before any Anglo settlers or African-American enslavement that occurred. These folks were the stewards. We need to recognize the tribal nations and their ability to help conserve the land. And I'll get to an example of how we've been helpful in that regard. Supporting private land conservation. We don't get to 30 by 30 if 60% of the land is owned by private individuals. We just simply can't get there. So we have to really put emphasis on organizations like Capital Region Land Conservancy to work with the private landowners, to incentivize them, to educate them, to make it easy for them, discuss it in layman's terms, and really try to initiate more conservation locally by those relationships that we have. And lastly, let's use science. We've seen where science can be very important, and when people turn a blind eye to science, we can go down the wrong path very quickly to great detriment. So those are the principles. How do you boil this into an immediate action plan? So the report has these 6 priorities for an early focus. So, well, we talk about equity and inclusion. Let's get some more parks in our underserved communities. Let's really support tribal-led conservation and restoration priorities. Let's collaborate on conservation of our fish and wildlife corridors and habitats. Let's increase access for outdoor recreation everywhere, not just in underserved communities, not just in urban areas, but also on private lands and lands that really might be inaccessible to many. Let's incentivize. We've got to bring to the table money to our farmers and ranchers who otherwise have so much of their capital in the land and cannot afford to lose their livelihood because of placing an easement. Creating jobs. This is a great example of how this kind of an investment can create jobs. We can do restoration projects, we can do resiliency projects, and many of you have heard of the Civilian Climate Corps initiative in Washington. Well, what is Capital Region Land Conservancy up to? So up to today, we have getting a little bit of feedback. Although somebody has their audio on and control.
Parker, yeah, unmute yourself. I muted everybody, okay?
Okay, thank you, Glenn. I was just getting a lot of feedback. So in our 16-year history, Capital Region Land Conservancy, we hold 6 easements by ourselves. And we didn't start holding easements by ourselves until I came on board in 2015. And we now hold easements in Richmond, Powhatan, Hanover, Henrico, and Chesterfield. We co-hold easements on 14 properties that total over 2,000 acres. And this is where it gets more interesting. We realized that doing the voluntary land conservation projects is not going to get us to any goals very quickly. It takes a long time and it's still at the schedule of the landowner. So we pivoted and we started to do much more land acquisition, finding the ways to acquire, protect, and then transfer ownership of the properties for long-term stewardship after they were permanently protected. So in 2018, I mentioned we purchased Malvern Hill Farm. That was a $6.6 million transaction, which we, as of next month, will owe no debt on it. And we're transferring 95 acres to the National Park Service. We already transferred 380 acres to Henrico County, subject to a conservation easement with the Department of Historic Resources. We acquired 10 acres of islands in the Appomattox River from an individual who simply wanted for there to be an organization to steward them, and they were private lands. And so we're working with the Friends of Lower Appomattox River as part of their trail plan. If they need to cross the river, they could use these islands as part of the crossing. We acquired last year 4900 Longbridge Road, which was a fascinating story. I'll tell a little bit more. And then in December, we acquired 13 acres on Warwick Road in the city that will become a public park in the future. We got national accreditation in 2019, which has actually opened up new opportunities for us and in terms of funding and partnerships. So what does the local comprehensive plan say? This is where it gets tricky. We, the land trust, have to have a very good relationship with every jurisdiction in our service area. The state code says that a conservation easement must be a voluntary act of a landowner and it must comply with the local comprehensive plan. Well, we, in order to take judgment out of compliance, we work with our local planning offices and we seek letters acknowledging compliance of the comp plan for our easement projects. And that can be tricky since the comprehensive plans get updated every few years. We just got called into Hanover County to talk to them about solar siting in their new comp plan update that will happen in 2022. But the last time we brought all of the jurisdictions together to evaluate each comprehensive plan and where they supported conservation, this was our regional map of where conservation would best be suited and be compliant with the comprehensive plan. And you can see you've got your urban core, and all of this just gets pushed out along the waters into the periphery. And that's largely due to no plan to run water or sewer out to those regions. But fortunately, we have a good relationship with the planning departments, and they will consider individual projects on a case-by-case basis, so long as we can make the argument for why it should be protected. But from a comprehensive plan perspective, you can see some of our largest protected areas are already in their comprehensive plan for where they would like to see conservation lands. Well, what does the science say? I'm going to go back to some maps here, and I will try to go through these quickly, and just bear with me. But as I mentioned, there's a database called the Virginia Natural Heritage Data Explorer, and you can pull up a whole lot of maps. Well, this is the current ecological cores map. You'll remember I showed you one that showed 2000, 2003, 2013. Well, this is the current one. Again, we have just this big void in our city, but we're beginning to see some restoration and real habitat coming back along the James River Park system in downtown, which is very exciting. These are the natural land wildlife corridors. This is where land is available and where it is anticipated that much of the wildlife that is terrestrial is crossing to bring their habitat and their migration patterns. And so looking at these kind of maps is very important for understanding what species are here and how we can best respond to their needs on the ground. Forest conservation, this is an old model. It basically says if you are going to operate in forestry, what's your best available timberland, and where are you going to find the best conservation purposes for acquiring timberland. It is not a carbon sequestration map. I would not use this if you were going to evaluate that kind of an opportunity. Again, watershed maps, we evaluate the impact of watershed. Any conservation easement must have deed restrictive language that protects water quality. Any perennial stream must have buffers. We can require planted buffers if we want to work with the landowner in that regard, but water quality is very important. And again, other agricultural models, I showed you the one from the American Farmland Trust. Now we're going to get into some newer science, and this is the Conserve Virginia model that was an initiative of Governor Ralph Northam. And the first model I'm showing you is if we have conserved lands and we want to add more buffer to those conserved lands to make them more resilient to development pressures or other pressure threats, where should we do that? And you will see that they kind of create these rings around what is already protected land, and these are high priority places. So I think this is probably the Amelia Wildlife Refuge, and this is probably Powhatan. Floodplain and flood resilience. We did our first easement that actually showed this model on it, which suggested that over time, the seagrass marshes would migrate on this property due to sea level rise. And therefore we had to anticipate about 50, 100 years from now where the buffers should be, not where they are currently today. And that is a result of some of these predictive models of where we should be preserving. Again, areas that could have the best for water quality improvement, natural habitat, ecosystem diversity. These are areas that rank in the top 10% of the state in terms of where protecting natural habitat would be important. The Chickahominy River cannot be understated in terms of its habitat viability, as well as the Pamunkey River. These are some really pristine corridors. Let's see, right up here you've got Cumberland Marsh area that is a nature conservancy. agriculture and forestry. And then this is the map that I want to stop for a moment. So if we're looking at conservation of land, the map that populates the most for the Richmond region is this one, which is the cultural and historic preservation. And essentially for our state, this is the top 10% of land that should be protected. And it relates primarily to battlefield preservation. Now, if anybody knows Peter Smallwood at the University of Richmond, you'll know he recently wrote a book about how battlefield landscapes are now really becoming the future of natural restoration and resiliency. You have these no man lands between, you know, the DMZ or whatever, and they're thriving with wildlife habitat. And we have that same opportunity with battlefield preservation if we go down that path. And here is all of those layers rolled up into one major model. So again, you will see kind of that eastern Henrico Varina area is a very important area to preserve. A lot of that has to do with Newmarket Heights, which was the battlefield where the US colored troops had their greatest victory. The battles of Deep Bottom 1 and 2, which again had the US colored troops active in those fights. You get Malvern Hill down here. So I just share that. But what does the justice component of this look like? We've kind of talked about the science, we've talked about the community-led, but how do we address the needed service to underserved communities, and what does justice look like? Well, we're very fortunate. The EPA, if you're not familiar, they have what they call the EJ Screen, Environmental Justice Screening Tool, which is a mashup of a lot of different data, census data, health data, and it is available for every jurisdiction in the country. So you can look at this map of our region and really begin to get an assessment of not just the city population, but where are our EJ communities that have the greatest needs. So we know South Richmond, we know kind of in the East End, both in the city and in Henrico County. We know Charles City County, you can see Petersburg down here, but all of a sudden we start to layer in some of these other communities into some of the broader jurisdictions. And I highlight this one right here. This is where the Pamunkey Indian Reservation is located. And there's another model. This is through the Virginia Institute of Marine Sciences. They have a social vulnerability index, which is very similar. You can go anywhere in Virginia, look at the census data. You can narrow it down based on health, air quality, water contaminants, and a whole host of variables to determine the environmental justice community need. So I just highlighted our region here. And then for anyone who's familiar with RVA Green 2050, you will know that we in the city of Richmond have created our own kind of climate equity index that is a little bit, takes all this data a little bit further. And this is the model that we're helping with as a partner for the city, particularly in South Richmond, to locate where we should be finding parks and which communities need our support. So as we think about the 30 by 30, yes, we can see, well, we've got historical resources, we've got habitat resources, we've got farming resources, and this is really the people component. And how do we give people clean water, clean air? How do we bring nature to them? And so we're very mindful of these kind of models. And just one statistic, the director of Parks and Recreation for the city of Richmond claims that currently we've got about 6% of our city land use as parks and open space. He'd like to get to 15%. Now, 15% is a pretty high goal. I certainly would support that. But if we used the metric that is available from the Recreation and Parks Association, National Recs and Parks Association, they would have the city of Richmond with 2,300 acres of parks and recreational land based on our current population. not based on any future population forecasts. And that compares to today, where the city has just about 1,800 acres. So there's a deficit in the city that we know about being 500 acres. And certainly if we want to get to 15%, we're going to be talking about another 1,500 acres. And that's pretty substantial. Where are you going to find 1,500 acres in a landlocked city like Richmond, particularly as real estate prices are skyrocketing? As I say, how do we pay for it now? So we're very fortunate. Capital Region Land Conservancy has been working with a lot of state agencies, a lot of state grant providers, and we've been tapping into federal grant providers as well. Now, it's important to recognize not every land trust is going to go take the time to write these kind of very tedious grants and hope for the best. But my theory is if you don't put it in, you're not going to get the grant, so you might as well try. And to date, I'm pleased to announce that we have received several VLCF grants, we have received several DHR grants, and we have received 2 Virginia Outdoors Foundation grants and have several outstanding that we hope we will get positive feedback. And then on the federal side, we have just recently started to tap into some of the federal funding. The 2018 Farm Bill was a major milestone piece of legislation and came with substantial monies. And I'm really excited. We haven't issued our press release, but we just were awarded $2 million from the U.S. Department of Agriculture Natural Resource Conservation Service to do farmland preservation work, where we now have money to pay the landowner for the purchase of their easement, not to have it as a donation, so we can balance the incentives on that front. And I also wrote the grant so that we could secure urban agricultural land. Now, for urban farmers, oftentimes the value of the real estate is too pricey. They end up leasing the property, and once the real estate values spike and the landlord wants to get rid of them, they basically are evicted immediately. And they might have been on that property for 10 years and have put all of that labor into the property, and then they're just then left for naught. This, we're hoping, will allow for what is called a buy, protect, sell model, where Capital Region Land Conservancy could go in and potentially buy a 1-acre site, then put a conservation easement on it that would allow for the urban agriculture, and then sell it to a predefined buyer who might, in this case, be the leasehold, so that they can continue to operate and frankly get some equity into it. And the conservation easement will require that it be maintained as open space, parks, recs, agriculture. And we're talking with the Agrarian Commons as well. And Duran Chavis has initiated that. You might have seen our announcement today, $2.1 million in Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund going towards our purchase down on Dock Street. We received a DEIJ grant from the Chesapeake Bay program to really do an audit of Capital Region Land Conservancy and to develop a work program that is informed largely by a community needs assessment, again, prioritizing people in this. We received a $50,000 NIFWIF grant that we're just about to launch that will help with working on greening South Richmond and acquiring lands for future parks. We've been the recipient of American Battlefield Protection Program funds on the battlefields such as Malvern Hill and some other initiatives out in Eastern Henrico. Now, there are some other opportunities that are coming along. These are all federal agencies, but one that I want to highlight just briefly is something that the Department of Forestry for Virginia has taken the lead on, and that is something called Sentinel Landscape Program. Sentinel landscapes are a way that the Department of Defense, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Forestry, and several other agencies will come together, pool their resources. So they don't just have 300 million here or 150 million here. They will begin to pool their resources so an applicant can then apply to multiple funding sources with one application and increase the funding likelihood of that project. And it's all designated because of what the federal government calls sensitive military installations. North Carolina has done this down along the eastern shore and really has done an incredible job of protecting lands down there. We have the opportunity in Richmond basically to have our entire service area encompassed in one of 2 sentinel landscapes, and that will bring more incentive monies to help with land conservation. And one thing I will mention about this map, all these gray streaks that are a little bit strange, these are dark sky areas that the Navy needs in order to be able to do mission training that their planes can't be detected. It's very, I don't know all these details. I don't want to know all these details. I just know they're going to throw a lot of money at land conservation if we can get this program initiated in Virginia. So what has Capital Region Land Conservancy done lately? Last year and the beginning of this year, you will see we did an easement on 3/4 of an acre in downtown Richmond as an effort to help protect the view that named Richmond. This is not the Dock Street property. This is another parcel that was determined to be a major threat when all of this first boiled up and was the view from Libby Hill was named one of Preservation Virginia's endangered historic resources. We did a 3-acre easement on private land that was immediately adjacent to the James River Park system. We did a 49-acre conservation easement of a farmlet, small farm with a single family home on it off of Osborne Turnpike and right on the James River. And we also did a 124-acre working farm in the eastern Henrico area as well. Back to that land acquisition strategy, we took ownership of 39 acres on Longbridge Road. And what was fascinating is that it now is additive to the Malvern Hill tract that we purchased, where it is adjacent to conserved lands, conserved lands, conserved lands, and you start to add it all up and you really get to a huge landscape. So it's one of those, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? Well, in this instance, 40 acres at a time. And what was fascinating, we did a complete archaeological assessment of the property. We compared the title report to the census records. We ended up looking at death certificates, and we met with African-American family descendants of the family that had owned the property since 1870. And there was a cemetery that nobody could recall being on the property that we found during our archaeological assessment. And we've reconnected the family now to their ancestral land. And there's a component of the conservation easement that gives them certain rights and privileges. And then of course, the future park in South Richmond. And I just want to thank you all, the Sierra Club, Friends Falls of the James, because you all have supported our work to increase park and open space lands in South Richmond, as well as to expand the acreage in the James River Park Conservation Easement. We did a lot of advocacy work last year, and one of the ones that I feel really good about was something that Chief Adkins of the Chickahominy tribe did not want to bring a lot of attention to, but now that the budget has been signed and everything is golden, they have been granted $3 million from the General Assembly that will allow them to purchase slightly over 900 acres at a property that they know as Mamana Hunt. People here call it Church Point, and it's right on the Chickahominy River. It'll give them their first presence back on their namesake river. And what's important about this property is it is where the Chickahominy signed the treaty in 1614 with Governor Thomas Dale. Sadly, up until just a few years ago, the Chickahominy didn't own any land anywhere in the region. So now they will be able to acquire this property. And then we've also gotten some new funding in the budget for land conservation from the state level. What we're currently working on, we're still working with the city to add 140 acres into the James River Park System conservation easement, probably the worst of which is the city does not have records of how it acquired Williams Island, which is fascinating, 100-acre island in the James River that the city owns, but they don't know how they acquired it. and we need clear title to place an easement on the property. We're working with Chesterfield County to put 51 acres under an easement where they're getting federal grants to purchase that property down off of Route 10 and near 95. We'll have an easement record probably the first half of this year, 173 acres at the headwaters of the Chickahominy River in Henrico County. Amazingly, this was part of the Virginia Center Commons original tract of land. And so we're going to be protecting the headwaters there. Chesterfield County, you can just see this list, it goes on and on. One I think that the Sierra Club members will be really interested in is I have written now several grant applications for Bellmead on the James out in Powhatan County. They have purchased 56 acres and are developing a new environmental justice, social justice center called the Drexel Morrell Center. And we should have some good news maybe in June about some grants coming their way for that. Urban farming, I mentioned, public park sites in South Richmond, Goochland, Hanover, New Kent, you name it. And as I mentioned, we're tapping into a lot of new money. And at the beginning of the meeting, Glenn had asked me about something that Charles Price had left. And one of the things that I put here, Charles and I had been working for the last couple of years, getting Capital Region Land Conservancy to be a co-holder of the Bandy Field conservation easement. He was very concerned that that board or a future board may not understand conservation the way that he did, or have the kind of appreciation, and therefore may not be the type of steward that he envisioned at Bandy Field. And so our board and the Friends Board and the city of Richmond have already passed resolutions for Capital Region Land Conservancy to be the co-holder. And now we're just having to go in and open the conservation easement to amend it. So lastly, we're doing the Dock Street property. I know there were some questions maybe that you all have about what we're doing with 5¼ acres down right on the James River, one of the most historic properties in the city that will be turned into public space. We just took title to 353 acres at Deep Bottom Road in Henrico County that's adjacent to the park and the boat launch. And on May 27th, I'll be presenting to the school board whereby we have entered into an MOU for a new specialty education center at Verina High School that will focus on outdoor environmental and sustainability initiatives. And it will be a certificate program, and they will use this as their kind of campus for the outdoor classroom. And then we're working on 73 acres that are really in the heart of the Newmarket Heights battlefield. You might have seen the announcement today from Preservation Virginia that it has been listed as one of the greatest threatened properties, and then some other conservation easement projects. And I just want to say under other, if we're going to get to 30 by 30, we're going to have to bring money to the table. Capital Region Land Conservancy in less than the past 12 months has brought in nearly $5 million of national and state grant monies to support conservation work in our region. We have to be competitive. We cannot step back. We cannot rest. If we want to get from 6% to 30% or 15% or you name it, we're going to have to be ambitious. And for an organization that only 6 years ago had an annual operating budget of $65,000, I think you can see that we mean business and we're taking on some major strategic projects for our region. So I will quickly go through this. I don't know what my time is, Glenn, so you cut me off, but I just want to say, have you been to a park or protected land lately? Here's just a quick slide show of some old projects and some more current projects. You know, we did the Brown and Williamson Conservation Area, and we should be able to have public access trails there very, very soon. And I think several of you have been on our guided hikes. Conservation easement on the James River Park in 2009. Rivers Bend, 181 acres that has public access trails. This is a historic property which is now down to about 100 acres, and it has been in the same family's hands since 1838, and it has been subdivided and subdivided and subdivided to the degree that it's still barely a working farm. If it were divided again, it would no longer be a working farm. So these are the types of initiatives that we work on. A llama farm in Hanover, Malvern Hill, another working farm. Actually, this one was a working farm, and they have done a nutrient bank on it, which means that they planted trees and will help water quality out there. This is the farmlet that I had mentioned. And with that, Glenn, I'm going to open it up for questions.
We don't have any questions now, but if you'd like to put a question in, you can raise your hand, or it might be easier for you to type something in the chat box, because I'm managing 3 or 4 screens here and I can't keep track of them all. So please feel free to ask questions here, and I can unmute you if you'd like.
I have
Go ahead, Eileen.
I have a question. Hi, Parker. Thanks for everything. The great presentation. And I was wondering, have you done this presentation to Henrico County Board of Supervisors?
I have not, Eileen. We're family. I know so many of you all here. I would just say the last meeting that I had with Henrico supervisors was they felt that Verina was getting picked on with the effort of conservation work that we were doing out there, and they asked us to take a break. Well, if the science is telling us, if these models are telling us, if the funding is telling us this is where we should work, I'm sorry, that's where we're going to work.
Yeah.
So, and you know, particularly with the Newmarket Heights battlefields, how many battlefields have already been preserved, and why is the one that really is exemplar for the African American experience and 14 Medal of Honor recipients not protected?
Yeah.
A question here from Jessica Sims. I'll read it for you. She says, how can we best support your work at the state legislative level?
Great question, Jessica. So we sign up for our newsletter. We send out kind of alerts, follow our Facebook. We send out alerts when there's an action item. As you can imagine, things happen at the General Assembly very fast. You've got to be right on top of it. We want to always thank our delegates for supporting legislation that we want. I've written briefing papers for the Virginia Conservation Network. So we feel very strongly about going in as a coalition and having these initiatives be statewide so that when we come in, we've got broad support. One example was how we did the heirs property legislation, and we worked to get a Republican senator from Halifax County and a Democratic representative from Northern Virginia to sponsor the legislation, and nobody could object to the two very different positions that were coming into agreement. So follow us that way and we'll keep you informed. We would love to do a little bit more, but we're very fortunate in our region. We, I think, have a delegation that is very responsive to land conservation. So we just thank them.
Parker, here's a question for you. So some agricultural land is being used for solar panels, usually a 30-year lease on those. They are protecting farmland from development. I'm just curious to know whether you consider solar farms as preserved or conservation, or how do they fit into your scheme?
Well, one thing to clarify, it's not a farm. It's an industrial facility. I'll just clarify that.
There are hybrid projects now where they're going to try and, use the land for.
Yeah.
And also.
Well, so I will say, this is what I'll tell you, Glenn. It is still being debated. I think communities are still very split over this. We know we have to have renewable energy. We also know we need to have working farms. We also know we have to preserve our land. And there's certain ways of doing it right. And then there are certain ways of doing it wrong. One of the things, like I said, we got called into Hanover County Planning Department and they wanted to talk through siting of solar facilities. They had only 2 permits. All of Hanover County, the largest land area in the whole region, only has 2 permits that they are having to review. And by state code, they're required to provide a response in a certain number of days. They have essentially rejected both of them. And it's largely because of the siting, the zoning, and what they would like to better understand is how can we balance this? And what we have presented is, first and foremost, develop a plan that acknowledges the maps that I showed you all, where there are critical areas to be protected. Let's not put solar in the areas that we know already that need to be protected. And then there are also maps where we have like the utility corridors. That's where they want these to be sited for the efficiency to get to the grid. Let's develop a master plan and say these are the best sited locations for solar. And that's something that has already happened in several jurisdictions in Virginia. And I think most of Maryland's localities have done that. Give me 1 second.
Yvonne, you ask your question.
The other thing, Glenn, well, the other thing, if I may, sorry, Glenn, to interrupt you. So there was a big project that was being opened up in Powhatan, and we started consulting early on. It was a 3,000 acre site. They were going to put solar panels on only about 1,200 acres. But we had convinced them to give us a wildlife corridor permanent conservation easement of 800 acres that was going to connect Belmead on the James to the Powhatan Wildlife Conservation Area. So we were looking at, you know, they might have this for 30 years, but that permanent wildlife corridor is a forever benefit. And so we were talking through those types of initiatives. I am going to have conversations with the S-Power who are doing the big project in Charles City County. The farmer who has been bringing sheep to graze at Malvern Hill has a contract with S-Power to bring sheep to that Fredericksburg site and is talking about doing the same in the Charles City site. So we are in those conversations, but what we want to see are a few more permanent benefits. One of the biggest questions is after the lease, you know, you got to restore the site. And if there's no third party who can enforce that, the localities might just say, well, we'll sell it off to the developer who can mitigate and do whatnot. So Glenn, if you got thoughts, I would love them because this is a big topic in the land conservation community.
Daryl just mentioned that, and you probably are aware of this, the Nature Conservancy has done some analysis with regard to lands that are appropriate for solar and lands that may not be. So there's some info out there. Let me turn this over to, I'm sorry, let me turn this over to Siobhan. She had one question for you, and then I think she's going to turn it over to Joe for announcements. But thank you so much.
No, all I just said was, can we, how can Follows the James Group support you, Parker, and your organization? I know we give up grants up to $1,000, so, and our paperwork isn't that arduous.
And thank you. We've been the beneficiary of those grants previously, so thank you very much. I would just say keep amplifying the message. The more people that hear about what we need to be doing to get to 3030, who is the organization on the ground accomplishing that goal for our region, I think is very important. And frankly, does anybody know about the Festi? Festi is like a music festival. Anyways, I was talking to them. They're nominating us for Conservation Alliance grant. And they do concert venues in South Carolina, North Carolina, and in Virginia. And somehow Capital Region Land Conservancy scored in the top 5 conservation organizations that attendees to their concerts wanted to see supported. My jaw dropped. I said, who are those people? I want to see them.
That's great. Congratulations.
So just keep amplifying the message.
Okay, thank
Obviously, you support Sierra Club, support all of the environmental groups to the means that you can.
All right, thank you. Okay, Joe, would you like to wrap up and thank Parker?
Yes, indeed. Of course. Parker, thank you very much. And as always, we offer a token of appreciation, a $50 contribution to an organization of our speaker's choice, which will go to the Capital Region Land Conservancy. I think that Festi is in Nelson County at Devil's Backbone Brewing Company in the fall. back
It
when there were
used to
normal
be,
times?
they moved with COVID, but that's where it used to be.
Okay, right, right. That's great. Um, so we'll wrap up with just a few announcements here. Please join us again on Tuesday, June 8th, when our speaker will be Victoria Ronau, and the topic will be Rights of Nature. She is the director and founder of VINDER, Virginia Network for Democracy and Environmental Rights. And we will learn that evening about the Rights of Nature movement. Our fellow local group in the state of Virginia, the York River Group, has a really interesting sounding program on Wednesday, May 19th. Congressman Don McEachin is going to talk about, as you see on your screen, legislation for a study of the Great Dismal Swamp. And this would hopefully, my understanding is, bring that area into a more protected category. So that's our friends at York River Group hosting a virtual meeting on May 19th. 3 of our Falls of the James Group committees have meetings coming up. On Thursday, May 20th at 7 p.m. is our advocacy committee, where we discuss what we can do on various campaigns to support good initiatives and oppose bad development. This is you will learn so much if you attend this committee. Some of our sharpest minds convene every month under the leadership of Lee Williams. Then on Thursday, May 27th is our membership engagement committee. That's the group that puts together programs like this, talks about fundraising, talks about outings, and we'll soon be talking about what we will do as we move back to not entirely distanced events. And finally, our Skip the Plastics Committee has a meeting on June 10th at 6 p.m. And Lisa Thompson has been running that effort lately. It was initiated by Steve Carter Lovejoy. So we would love to have you at any of those 3 events. And I believe Siobhan is going to say a few words, as she has been very, very active lately with the Friends of Belmead Park. And Siobhan is going to tell us a little bit more in depth about what they do there on the second Saturdays of the month, 9 a.m. to noon, and every Saturday now in the afternoons, 1 to 4.
Right. So if you got our newsletter, you kind of heard about Bob Argerbright, and this is Belmead Park in the South Side in Richmond, not the one in Belmead on the James Parker. So it's a little different. But basically, Lisa Thompson again has been kind of spearheading the reading tutorials with Bob every Saturday from 1 to 4. And what I've been doing at least one day a month has been going over and working with the kids. And they're really a lot of cute little kids from 6 years of age to 15 years of age, mostly Hispanic kids, who benefit from reading some environmental books at their reading level. So we just kind of practice reading outside for an hour. And then we segue into the vegetable garden, and they do some planting, weeding, just getting their hands dirty. And it's just delightful to see them so enthusiastic about, gardening and planting and helping out and watering. And I found this little grasshopper in the grass, and this little girl picked it up, and they were just all over the place. I mean, that was the tamest grasshopper I've ever seen. And anyway, if you're interested in helping out with some tutoring as well as working with kids, and we all wear masks outside, let me know and I'll get you connected with Lisa Thompson. She is an ESL teacher, and so she has been working with Bob to coordinate these. And actually this next Saturday at 1 o'clock, they're having a picnic for the collegiate students who've been helping doing a lot of tutoring and reading with the kids. And then we're gonna go into the garden and do some planting with the kids. So if you're interested, contact me. I'll send out a notice of the links to all these programs and future meetings tomorrow or whenever Glenn has the recording of this, so I can send it out to you all if you wish to see more, because Parker went through a lot of information. So I'll send you the recording, and eventually we'll have it on our website if that's okay with you, Parker. Okay. All right.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. I'd like to also acknowledge that it was our friend Daryl Downing who made the original connection with Belmead and with Bob Argabright there. And so one last thing, if you're wondering what to do with the rest of your evening, I've seen the emails go around. Tonight, PBS Frontline has an episode called Plastic Wars. And so that is at 10 p.m. on our local PBS station, if you want to watch a screen at 10 o'clock tonight. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll be back here on the second Tuesday in June. Thank you so much, Parker, for the great presentation tonight. And thanks to Siobhan and to Glenn Bessa, who owns the Zoom account and makes this all possible. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night. Thank you, Parker. Thanks, everybody.